I'm going to start by introducing myself. So you hopefully saw me earlier and took part in that very fun Mentimeter activity. So I'm Victoria, and I'm working with the Imperial team, generally with the wider 2050 calculator team. And you can see Iman here, who is the second facilitator for this room. Iman, do you want to briefly introduce yourself before we start?
Hi there, everyone. My name is Iman. I'm from the Malaysia office, Mott MacDonald Malaysia office. Nice to meet everyone. Looking forward to discuss further. Over to you, Victoria.
Brilliant. So we are encouraging people to share their screens. Hello, Isabel. I can see you popping on. Thank you for that. But if not, please feel free to unmute yourselves so that I can see that you're engaging, unless you've got a particularly noisy background, in which case maybe keeping that off is the best idea. So we're group 6, and we're going to be looking at stakeholder engagement and chatting about stakeholder mapping and stakeholder engagement. So I'm going to quickly share my screen, and we're going to start off with some definitions, and then hopefully we'll have a solid 15 minutes to go through 3 specific questions. Right, can you see the screen there, Iman?
Yep.
Fab. So just to define, I'm sure everyone is fully aware, you've worked on your own calculators, but a stakeholder is any individual, group or organisation that can affect or is affected by your 2050 calculator. And stakeholder mapping is that process of visualising and mapping key stakeholders involved in developing and promoting the use of your 2050 calculator. So hopefully both of these phrases and stakeholder engagement itself are ones that you are familiar with. Okay, so we've got a couple of questions that we were hoping to sort of talk to you all about today. And that sort of first one is, how did the engagement with stakeholders benefit the 2050 project that you worked on? So Elizabeth, because you introduced yourself, and I know that you are one of your leads in your calculator, do you feel like you have an answer to that? So how did engagement with stakeholders benefit your 2050 project that you worked on?
Well, I can answer with 2 elements. First of all, for the development of the 2050 calculator, we had organized a number of workshops per sector before defining the levers and the data. So there was a long process of engagement in that respect. So it allowed the organizations involved, federations, to be part of the thinking process. But then once the project was launched, it was very important to keep it lively, and that's where we and actually I've been working with BASE with this. We've been training climate coaches that go into schools and help teachers and students to use the tool and have a debate about what is their preferred scenario, what are the options, and we've been reaching more than 20,000 pupils. So it's in the preparation, and once the project is launched, it's important to keep it up.
Yeah, definitely. So you're saying like it keeps that sort of lively energy, a lot of iterative work and things like that. Fantastic.
Yeah.
Did anyone else have the same experience, or anything slightly different? Isabel, I might have to pick on you because you're the only other face I can see. But if anyone who doesn't have their camera off wants to participate, please pitch in or type in the chat. Yeah, Isabel, what was your thoughts on that?
So my role is I work on the international calculator. I'm from BASE, so I don't exactly have any direct experience with challenges, but I know that several of the teams that I work closely with do. But yeah, I can't really add much.
That's okay. That's okay. Hello, Kiranji. Did you come on to participate with this question? Do you have anything to input?
Okay. Actually, I can't exactly answer the question. I'm from Malaysia, yeah. I'm from Malaysia.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. I just want to say that our calculator is still in being in the web to conversion mode now. So we are still getting some expert from the ministry on how to, I mean, for them to get comment to get comment on our data and what are the assumption we use lah. So we are still ongoing on that. That's what I can say lah.
Brilliant. And what are you hoping to get from your stakeholders then, if we put it that way? What is one of your key things that you'd want to get from your stakeholder engagement? What do you want the benefit to be?
Yeah, at least like we can get some comments from them and then get the endorsement, and we can launch it soon as the web tool.
Brilliant. Endorsement's a really good word. I really like that. It's that sort of permission to proceed, that sort of validation. That's a brilliant way of thinking about it. Does anyone else in the chat have any thoughts? Like, what was the biggest benefit you found to engaging with your stakeholders? I see some names I recognize, but might be in a similar position to Isabel. If not, we can move on to the next question, which I think might be a little bit more interesting. Were there any stakeholders that you found was quite difficult to connect with for whatever reason? So this just could be in terms of communication, in terms of access, etc. Did anyone have a particularly interesting experience or found that there was some barriers to that communication at any point? Elizabeth, I'm going to pick on you again, if possible. Did you there was any particular difficulties in that area?
Well, I think it's easy to have the endorsement of the actors that are involved, especially in the energy sector. But when it comes to different interests, competing interests, conflictual situations, then it can be very tense, and that makes it even a more lengthier process in the preparation. And once you have launched the tool, in our respect, well, we launched it and we promote it in schools, but I think now it's time to go beyond and go to cities and go to local municipalities who also are becoming very active and have their own climate plans, to create alliances with them. But where it's very diverse again, but where the tool can have a very important role as catalyzer beyond schools, I think. So.
Yeah, so it wasn't necessarily that there was a particular sort of stakeholder group that was difficult. It was just when there was that conflict of interest that arose, that you saw that sort of difficulty in some ways. Yeah, really interesting.
But that's climate change as such.
Yeah, absolutely.
Part of climate change. So
that's not exclusive to the calculator. I think that comes with the territory. Isabel, working with BASE, have you found that there's like a commonality between different groups in terms of stakeholder engagement that people struggle with?
Yeah, so the countries that I work with closely are Kenya, Zimbabwe, and Malaysia. And I know in Malaysia, it's been very difficult due to the change in government, and kind of if there are personnel changes during the course of the project, then getting buy-in from new officials who are not necessarily the officials who signed off the project in the first place, or even maybe the minister has changed, that's particularly challenging for teams. So it's about continuous engagement rather than seeing the stakeholder engagement phase as something separate and after the development of the model. And it also involves a lot of work on our end, working closely with embassies or the British High Commission and making sure that they're also really engaged, because they often have better political levers than we do to engage the local government.
Yeah, fantastic. So it's very much about keeping up that sort of culture of participation, regardless of who the individuals are. That's a really interesting way of of thinking about it. I imagine that is quite difficult because obviously any change of responsibility is hard to do. Hello, do you have an input on this one?
Hello, Victoria, and say hi to those of my kind of used to be my team, Iman and Anurag, and we met each other as well, Isabel. Hello. I'm Natawat from Thailand. Like I used to be part of the calculator team in Thailand. So actually, my thought is like on the engagement with stakeholders. I think the government agencies like tend to be, from my experience though, like in Thailand, there would be kind of the barrier on collaboration between agency within the government itself, like kind of bureaucratic issues between them, and then it's very difficult to like have support from other ministries or stakeholders when like it's cross-sector. Yeah, that's what I think is the most difficult thing, like to do with the stakeholder engagement. So I'm not sure if kind of any other countries have any issue on this, like working with government agency and then like having difficulties when, for example, requesting for information or data in detail. Yeah, like have you kind of have any solution on that? Yeah, just to share a bit there.
No, that's really, really good. That's the sort of the discussion that you're not part of. That's not very good potentially. That sometimes makes it harder for you to do your job. Fab, we've got some more people coming up. Was anyone working off of that point?
Yes, actually, we've had difficulties with regards to the engagement with stakeholders, particularly with the government agencies as well. I think we're gonna go with the number 3 question, right? I think we should be more aggressive when it comes to them, because tendency for some of our government agencies that if you leave them hanging, that the ease of communication would be not as smooth as before. So we have to constantly remind them of the data requirements, or for example, the requested levels, because in our part, I'm working with the energy department. So we are requesting data with, let's say, the agriculture sector. So it's very difficult in our part to do so. So we have to constantly communicate with them. So yeah.
So was that in response to sort of how would you approach it if you were to sort of start again, almost?
Yeah, I guess so.
But in terms of like, because it's difficult to engage with your stakeholders.
Yeah, I get, because engagement with them, it's a very lengthy process. Yeah. You have to establish a sort of numerous stuff to do. So
yeah, definitely. I think that's a really, really fair point to say. Just that sort of it's not just being consistent in that communication. It is that frequency of communication to make sure that they are constantly aware that you're sort of not going away, maybe.
Yeah.
Does anyone have on that last point? Does anyone have any thoughts in terms of if you were to start this process again? Now, what would you potentially do differently, knowing that maybe there are some benefits that you didn't know about when you started, or some difficult stakeholder communication that was there? Is there anything that you'd potentially do slightly differently? Or has everyone done their stakeholder engagement so perfectly the first time round? Is that the thought?
I think one of the key thing that we need to consider is like our planning itself, like in terms of timeline, because for example, in Thailand, the invitation process or any invitation letters that will be issued by government agency like take so long, I would say. Yeah, and then we have to plan ahead, like I don't know, like a couple of weeks or even month, like in order for them to issue just one letter, because like the steps of hierarchy, like to the director and then other director of director general, like even higher, like before issuing any letter or something like that. Yeah, I think should plan like quite carefully.
So that's almost a much earlier sort of preparation and start date, just to sort of give you that buffer time almost, because you never know how long that'll be. That's a really fair point. Got a thumbs up from Carlo, which I appreciate. Is there anyone else that wanted to sort of cover any of the questions? I'm going to have a quick look in the chat just to make sure that there's. So there is actually one question. So which tips, tricks and tools to keep record and feedbacks effectively from stakeholders? So there might be scattered inputs of various categories. So clarify if I'm wrong, but that's sort of just how do you keep the sort of data collection consistent across different stakeholder engagement?
Yeah, that's part of the questions. Yeah, that's right. Because I suppose that we have a lot of feedbacks in the various levels and also in the different aspects. So then we need to just categorize correctly and just effectively to just correction calculator effectively.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, for me, I think one of the things that I'd always encourage is just a very early prep, so very similar to what was just being said. And I think that might be one of the hardest things to know what to do when you're starting your stakeholder engagement, because obviously you don't necessarily know what your code design workshop's going to look like. But early prep, and I think that something like this, like a conversation on how other people have collected that data. But I think consistency, like if you record them all, then that's it. That'll help. Because then it might be you've got the whole chunk of thing, but then you can decide what to do with it and things like that. But if anyone has anything else that they wanted to quickly put in to the group chat on any of the questions, or a feedback onto how people have collated their data, I think we've got about 5 seconds, but access to the chat after this. But thank you very much, everyone. That was a really good session.